Special Operations Training Detachment, CPT West, Burro Team. Coming at you from NTC, Off the Radar.
This is Off the Radar. I'm Captain Weston Rich, an observer coach trainer for the Green Berets at the National Training Center. With us today to talk about lessons learned from a recent rotation, 2506 at the National Training Center, and a little bit about the scenario design, as well as how to prepare for this, any upcoming rotations that you may have in the near future for our listeners out there, is Major Matthew Song. He is the current ex-con director and J3 for the Special Operations Training Detachment, AOB West, also known as the Burro Team, and he will be taking over as the OIC here in the near future. So with that, Major Song, please give us a brief introduction about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I am currently the ex-con director for the first year, and then I'll be taking the AOB West OIC position after Major Phil Ficken. So for experiences, so I served in the 10th Mountain Division. It's a PL and XO. And then I did my 03 and 04 time with 1st Special Forces Group. Started off in Okinawa and then came to JBLM. And then I've been here since August of last year, and I think I'm counting on 6 rotations so far.
Yeah.
So definitely enjoying the time out here. It's been really enriching, and then really the assignment that I thought that I didn't want, but that I really needed.
Yeah, I think a lot of us end up here appreciating our time here, even though most probably don't think, oh, I really want to go to Fort Irwin and live out in the Mojave Desert. But I will say it was awesome knowing that you were coming here, because our time at First Group overlapped a little bit, and we actually got to do a JCX exercise together out in the lovely country of South Korea, which had some flavor of a CTC, not quite, but what a biggest takeaway as an AOB commander from that experience, sir?
Yeah, I think for that experience, and what I've taken away from here is that there's a lot of good home station and training that AOBs and ODAs can do at JCS exercises, but the support, both in role player support, resourcing, and money, does not compare to the CTCs. So bottom line, do whatever you can to come to the CTCs. And if you can't, we are trying as hard as possible to produce usable lessons learned that we can pass on to the force. So things like this podcast, things like AARs and sit reps, we try to make as easily accessible as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So reach out to your lessons learned at your group or at USASOC. They're happy to share. They'll send you their NIPR or SIPR portal links if you're, within USASOC, and you can access that stuff, and that's got a wealth of information. You can also reach out directly to SOTD, either AOB West here at the National Training Center or AOB East over at Joint Readiness Training Center. And I'm sure that our listeners out there probably know somebody that works there. RSOF's a pretty small community. So we'll dive in and we'll talk about 2506 November. Kind of an odd rotation for RSOF. A typical rotation has a company command, or company headquarters, and usually 2 SF detachments, as well as augments from civil affairs, psychological operations, and then enablers from other MOSs that support special forces and special operations. And then we usually or often have a team or 2 playing Red SOF. That can include civil affairs or PsyOps as well. But this particular rotation had none of that. What was at 2506, sir?
Yeah, to start off with scenario design. So for 2506, so basically from the 23rd of March to the 5th of April, members from 7th Special Forces Group formed a SOFLE. So this was folks from their company headquarters. Mm-hmm. So they were the RSOF rotational training unit, and they integrated with 3-1 Cav Division. So the SOFLE was an actual unit, and then the AOB and the SODIF were constructive. And the AOB consisted of 6 ODAs, 1 CAT team, and 1 SIDET. And for overall scenario design, they were basically conducting irregular warfare to target high payoff targets within the Corps and Division AOs to support the Joint Force as they were compelling the withdrawal of the Denovians who came across the Pertuni border.
All right, so SOFLE, Special Operations Force Liaison Element. That means they were working inside the conventional unit headquarters, their talk, right?
Yes. So the SOFLE was split basically between two footprints. So they were with the Brigade Combat Team's rear command post and then with their main command post. So the Brigade Combat Team opted to split their disposition to lower their EM or electromagnetic spectrum signature. And they put a preponderance of their analytical capabilities. So we're talking intel folks, fires in what's called the BICE or the Brigade Intel Support Element. And that was in the rear area, so to speak. And then the Brigade main and the TAC were both forward, closer to the FLOT, involved in the close fight, if you will.
Okay. So was this rear area in the scenario, did we let the rear be, geographically separated by a significant amount so that it was in a permissive or somewhat semi-permissive environment? Or did the rear area get contested by Black Horse at all?
Yes. So the rear area was contested, but it wasn't as contested as the main command post was.
Obviously.
But both the rear command post and the main command post did feel all the forms of contact that we would typically see Black Horse deploy as a part of a typical rotation.
All right.
In terms of the integration piece, so the 3-person package, they basically integrated across all the different warfighting functions. And by the end of the rotation, we really saw them as being a key and integral part of the BCT's operations when they were monitoring, coordinating, advising, and then synchronizing operations with the conventional force operations that were going on as well within the scenario.
Okay, so those 3 personnel, what was their makeup, and
Yep.
do you think that worked well, or was there anything, other capabilities that they would have been beneficial for them to have?
Yep. So for starters, they were a little bit limited on personnel just due to operational requirements for that particular unit. So what they could source was a 3-person SOFLE, which consisted of an 18 Alpha, so it's SF Special Forces Officer, Special Forces Intelligence Sergeant, so 18 Fox, and then 18 Echo, a Special Forces Communications Sergeant. This actually turned out to be a very good package.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been even better if they were able to have a little bit more horsepower with the 18 Alpha. So either another 18 Alpha or a 180 Alpha would have made that an even better package. And I think a 4-person package with mobility and then a robust communications package is probably a best practice that other AOBs can take with them moving forward for future rotations.
So they need to be able to move themselves without depending on the conventional unit?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And then did they array themselves by warfighting function, or did they the Alpha just try to take over going to all the working groups, or?
They tried to, so at first they tried to integrate at all the working groups, and then they realized that they just didn't have enough bandwidth to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
So they specifically targeted their efforts towards targeting and then at interjecting at key touch points with the brigade commander, things like your CUB or commander's update brief or commander's or the battle update briefs were like the 2 additional touch points that they had that were well worth their time.
Okay, so that makes me wonder, with the constructed AOB, which is something we don't normally do, was it difficult for that SOFLE to have that commander to commander dialogue with the brigade commander, or how'd that work out?
It was, and a little bit of truth in lending. The brigade was very aware that all the SOF actions were constructive, but they were definitely very receptive to the coordinations that were going on. They were very open to all the information, both in terms of intelligence and then the integrated fires targeting that the ODAs were providing. Those were the 2 biggest things that they took away and were able to use as a part of their steady state operations, if you will. So they were able to get insight into locations that were beyond just where they were fighting in the close fight. So as an example, kind of in one kind of big, I would say not takeaway, but I guess a big win that we had was for one of the ODAs, or excuse me, so for the SOFLE, during 3-1's seizure of Razish, the SOFLE was able to provide the brigade some human-derived intel that provided an accurate picture, and then with also some close-up pictures of the enemy disposition that was out in Razish. So that resulted in the brigade immediately passing up to division, and the enemy disposition they were able to get were both in Ujin and in Razish. And in Ujin specifically, which is a little bit further west from Razish, they were able to target and destroy the Black Horse 112th BTG's TOC.
Oh, wow.
Which was also coordinating for the defense of Razish as well, which was a great win for what we call SOF CFI 3. So integration, interoperability, and then interdependence.
Wow. That's awesome. So knocking out that Tactical Operations Center really interrupted the mission command of Black Horse, and probably not only helped with the conventional units maneuver, but left a impression on those leaders within that brigade, understanding one type of effect that special operations can provide for them.
Yeah, so I think this was also a big win in that, and so this would have been my 5th, or I guess it would be my 6th rotation now. Just the understanding that the brigade and division commanders that are coming in here understand what SOF provides in the battlefield, and they know how and what to ask SOF units for. And it's also important to remind the audience that a lot of these brigade and division commanders that are coming in have significant SOF bona fides, meaning they've either served in locations where there have been SOF units with significant actions and contributions, or they've commanded SOF units themselves, especially if they were either in a special mission unit or if they were commanding an element at Ranger Regiment, as an example.
Yeah.
So I think this bodes well for the future of SOF CFI 3.
Yeah, we really appreciate when people have that exposure, whether they were attached to SOF, worked alongside SOF, or were in 75th or somewhere else. Like even the Commander of Ops group currently has some 75th Ranger experience. So that definitely helps them. They understand the conventional unit maneuver, and then they have a lot of ideas on how SOF can play into that. So you mentioned communications being a critical thing for a SOFLE. So what commo did they have? How did it work? What may not have worked, or what worked well?
Yeah, so this is one of our big findings for this particular rotation, was just in regard to comms. We learn and develop different findings about communications every rotation, but for this particular one, the SOFLE employed a mini Starlink, which is the first time that we've seen an RTU use one, and they used that in conjunction with the RAVAC and BMA phones. And then as a note, this particular unit could only bring, so they had to kind of scavenge for comms equipment because their company was deploying for a different operation. So they took priority of equipment and resourcing. But we found that the employment of the Starlink was interesting in terms of two things. So we saw that the Starlink was difficult to detect via ground collection. And then two, what we also tried for this particular iteration was to get a thermal cross-section of the Starlink Mini as well. So for both, we found that they were pretty difficult to collect. And so these are also the two main ways that Black Horse or the OP4 characterize upper TI communications within NTC.
Interesting. Was that just from Black Horse's collection and not from our own?
No, this was for us so we could capture both the data and the pictures so we could codify that for lessons learned products. But what's also unique about the Starlink Mini, which we've seen from units that have brought out like the bigger Starlink terminals, is that it draws significantly less power.
Okay.
And then the thermal signature is also lower as well. And this is something that we'll continue to experiment with, in that we'll continue to get these cross sections and we'll give it back to rotational units as they come out, just so they understand what they look like when they're using a system such as Starlink.
Oh yeah. Like, well, we had a conversation with Sergeant Kai Ramirez on here about a lot of things commo related and electromagnetic spectrum, and that's something that is packaged up in our AARs. So if you do reach out to your lessons learned, they might be able to share that portion as well. But simple takeaway, you got to have good tactics, techniques, procedures when you're using commo equipment, because it's all vulnerable in some way to detection. It might not be able to, or the enemy might not be able to listen to what you're saying or intercept what you're saying, but they will be able to detect it in some way, shape, or form. So simple TTPs is the best way to mitigate that.
Absolutely. So with the Starlink in particular, so it's great and all that, but it eats up a lot of power and it's very, very hot.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention also that it's white. So when you pull it out of the box, if you don't camouflage it, you don't cover it, that in of itself is very easy to detect, especially out at the National Training Center. So everything that you brought up with things that we typically coach, using comms windows, offset comm shots, terrain masking, these are all still valid, and they must be employed in conjunction with using your sweet new type of upper TI communication systems.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point of, simple point of the color of your, whatever it is, not just your Starlink Mini, but any piece of gear that you bring out needs to match the terrain, or you need to mask it. So don't want to get visually detected. There's you want to make it as difficult as possible for the enemy to find you. So don't just be out there with a big white square hanging out a tent window or something.
Exactly. And those are things that, if you maybe don't figure it out as a part of home station training or, pre-mission training for, say, NTC, that stuff you can figure out here and you can make adjustments on the fly.
All right. So with the use of their Starlink Mini, I'm sure they were doing all sorts of stuff on digital products and helping send that back to the AOB. Was there anything that they were using small element? Did they utilize analog products? That's one thing we normally coach units on out here.
Yep, they certainly did. And that is pretty typical standard boilerplate coaching points that we provide to rotational training units out here, is to use and develop analog fighting products. And then also want to make a point and plug to understand and execute MDMP. And then kind of the other third point that I want to add too is building systems and then putting them into a TACSOP so that they're codified, systems that are able to survive volatility in a comms denied environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those three things are still valid, and those three things are still important coaching points that we bring to every single rotation.
So were they providing value inside of the brigade's own MDMP process because they were co-located with the brigade, or were they feeding back information that went into the constructed AOB's MDMP process? It
was the first part. So they were able to identify, because they were a part of all the planning processes of the brigade, they were able to identify requirements ahead of time, anticipate those, and then communicate those back to the HICOM. So we played both the AOB and the SOTF. We kind of crunched them together a little bit to get some insight before the brigade realized that they needed those, or got them just in time for the brigade to be able to use them when they were stepping off for whatever objective they were going to. Okay,
so typically your role is HICOM and execution control, because there's a major, normally an SF major here, commanding a company that's playing that is the AOB commander. So was it a lot of you pushing the SOFLE information or requests for information, or were they doing a lot of pulling? Because normally we try to teach, coach, mentor on forecasting requirements. And I'm wondering how well they did at that when it was a constructed AOB.
Yeah, I think to start with, and I definitely felt this as the HICOM OIC, they were in receive mode for a lot of the initial data pushes. And then I think it felt like within the 48 to 72 hour mark, we felt a noticeable shift in the way they were asking and answering questions, and then trying to forecast out as aggressively as possible, which indicates to me, one, they were able to get a individual and detachment battle rhythm set, and then they were able to basically feed into the brigade's OODA loop while also maintaining basically separation between and coordinating between kind of what the brigade was doing and then what they understood the ODAs were also doing as well within the JSOA,
Yeah.
or the Joint Special Operations Area.
Yeah, I mean, being a liaison's tough. You have to understand both entities as much as possible, their maneuver, their intent, what they're planning to do, and then you're the continuity between the special forces, special operations element, and the conventional force. So, yeah, it's a tough role for anybody to fulfill. But like knowing your special operations background, okay, if I was the detachment in this joint special operations area, what would I need? What would I do? What's the information I need? What are the decisions I'd have to make? And then trying to communicate that to the brigade so that they can get resources. Potentially, they can get resources they need. And like that is a coordination relationship. It's not a take on or anything. So it's an extra layer to that challenge, but it is a worthwhile training opportunity for anyone that's able to get out there and do that. With that, or I'll let you.
Yeah, it is. And I think to the SOFLE's credit, so there were 3 things they were able to do on top of their L&O duties. So they were able to build rapport, demonstrate credibility, and then they provided added value.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that, and that's beyond the scope of kind of the boilerplate duties and responsibilities of an L&O, which is to monitor operations, coordinate, advise, and assist, and then synchronize. So those 3 things we see as vital, especially with that coordinating or supported relationship between the conventional forces and the soft forces that are out here. Mm-hmm. It's really that the ability to build rapport, to build that credibility, and then by providing added value are the 3 things that can make or break rotations out here.
Yeah, absolutely. You knock those 3 things out, like the unit that you're working with is going to open all the doors, and you're going to be able to make any connections you need to make and start getting resources flowing out to those elements that you're representing. Because like if you're sitting there at the brigade, whether you're the 18 Alpha Fox, whatever, if you're on shift, you're the representative of that commander of that. You might be this representing the SOF commander and getting the SOF things that they need at the time. Like, so it's a critical role for sure. And you got to do those special operations things that Major Song mentioned. You got to build rapport, provide value, etc. And then you can get to work being a liaison, understanding what the brigade needs, understanding what this SOF and the AOB need. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this discussion focused on special operations liaison elements at the National Training Center during rotation 25-06. In the next episode, we will discuss how a SOFLE must be able to understand what each commander is focused on at the brigade, division, AOB, and SOF levels.
Thank you for listening to Off the Radar, where RSOF prepares for conflict. Like, subscribe, and share on your listening platform. Actions will determine the outcome.